Hey everybody, it's Tinderbox Meetup with Michael Becker. I'm Mark Bernstein, the designer of Tinderbox. It's been a difficult week at Eastgate World headquarters. As I wrote on my weblog, I'm afraid I've been badly distracted by the murder of Renee Good. And at this hour, both the murderer and his accomplices remain at large, and nobody seems to think that this is surprising. I also note in passing that Mississippi's largest synagogue was burned down by an arsonist this morning, and it didn't even rate a mention in the New York Times. But in the brief periods in the last few days that I have not wasted on doom scrolling, we have had a couple of really useful backstage releases, and if you've not tried them out and you are backstage, please do, because we're coming up on a new full release to get this out to people. And we've had some great forum discussions, particularly about why the naming of things is a difficult matter. Also, congratulations are in order to Amber Glenn, Ilya Melinin, the Chicago Bears, and the Chicago Cubs. And here in Red Sox Nation, people will proceed to tear out their hair. And heaven forfend what happens if tonight goes badly. So, lots of news and lots of worries. Here is Michael Becker.
Hey everybody, welcome to our second meetup of the year. Typically our format is we go around the room, have new people introduce each other, or people who have not shown up for a long time, hi Art, to say hi and tell us what they've been up to. We then will jump into a theme. We don't have one today, or we pseudo have one, because I think we can continue part 2 of our Hitchhiker's Guide to Tinderbox. Dave's made some really good progress on that, and so it would be good to continue that discussion. So without further ado, let's jump in. But let's start with Art. Art, what's going on, man? Where have you been? Yeah, he's got to find mute.
There we go. Hi. Yeah, no, it's been a terrible for Tinderbox meetups for the last 2 or 3 months because I've been traveling back and forth, India, China, here. And so my clock is so messed up. I sleep at 2 or 3 in the morning, 4, and I wake up at 10, 11. So I'm always missing the meetups. But I think this and next week are my 2 stable weeks, and then the week after I'm back in India. So who knows? I shall try to be on, but when I'm there now when it's not daylight savings time, it's a 13 and a half hour difference. So I log on at 10:30 p.m., which is on a Sunday night. 10:30 p.m. is really hard um to be attentive and to give my full, to a meetup. So hopefully all this will sort out in a month or two. But otherwise, everything is great. I've got release 767. It's working super stable. I've got 2, 3 projects on the go. Nothing very vertical, just my usual ideating and mapping and things like that, and following pretty much everything that's going on the forums.
What has inspired you as of late in the discussions, if anything?
A
What
lot
comes
of
to
stuff
mind when
that
I ask that question?
immediately, I think, in fact, I was just thinking about that because I followed the meetup at Jacob, and I started using a couple of the apps that he recommended, including this thing called Ubar, whatever it's called. There were 2 or 3 apps that were suggested during that meetup, which are all great suggestions. But Tinderbox specifically, let me think. I love this whole tearaway window concept because, yeah, it's something that I don't know how it escaped me, but I've been doing that since then, and it's persistent. So even if I restart Tinderbox, I still have those open text windows stable. So that's really great.
Did you see the setting, the Mac OS setting that Andreas pointed out that allows you to consolidate those tearaway windows into a single window?
I did, and I actually have it on right now, but not for long because it's sort of annoying to me because every time I open a new Finder window, it also opens in a tab. If I open a new Safari
Yeah.
window, it also opens in a tab. So there's unless there's like a hotkey that I can press, say, Command or something, and then have it open in a separate window. I haven't spent time yet on it, but
Yeah.
I will change it.
Fantastic. All right. Well, thanks for letting me put you on the hot seat. So, Mr. Rogers, anybody else have any other comments before we have Dave jump in and give us his part 2 of Hitchhiker's Guide and the work he's been developing? If not, Mr. Rogers, maybe you can hop up and give us your latest evolutions.
Okay, okay. Try and manage expectations here again. I was very distracted this weekend, so or this week. Well, let's share. Let me make sure I've got this thing working. Um, Looking for a window. Not seeing it. Hang on a second. Let me close that. So what? Verify that it's there. It is there. Let's try this again. Aha. Nope. Let's see. What does this do? Nope. Why am I not seeing all? Oh, I got to scroll down. Look at this. Okay. I have so many windows open. Oh, there's an update to Hookmark. Um, Man, there's no easy way to select an app in this share thing. Tinderbox. There it is. Got it. Okay, share. All right. I should declare window bankruptcy. So uh, the video went up a little late and I was distracted anyway. So I was not able to kind of review. Am I clear? Am I talking?
Yep.
Okay. The discussion we had last week regarding naming, in the meantime, to kind of take my mind off of some of the other nonsense. On the general guidance of begin with the end in mind, I decided to add some applications that we see pretty frequently with Tinderbox users. This is just a rough outline. There's some material in here, but not a great deal. But these are more, again, intended to be kind of inspirational rather than how to. But we had the gentleman who I don't recall his name in the forum last week, who asked, how do I start with Tinderbox? And that is like just an enormous kind of a question. And that's what sort of informed this development of this container, in that you have to kind of know what objective you have in bringing Tinderbox to this problem or this challenge or this thing that you're trying to get your arms around, what you think Tinderbox is, how you think Tinderbox can help you achieve it. And here are some things that people have used Tinderbox for productively: personal knowledge management. I looked, and so these links are to forum posts, and there are some remarkable forum posts that I think, if nothing else, they deserve to be memorialized in this in a document of some kind. So this, and certainly I'll flesh this out more, but that's personal knowledge management, with Zettelkasten being the topic du jour, or the popular thing. Daily notes I just linked to the captain's log discussion that was basically using AppleScript with Tinderbox, and it evolved into captain's log. Haven't really done a great deal on task management, but it's one of the things that people use Tinderbox for. Haven't found a discussion on project planning yet, but that does not to say it doesn't exist. Long academic text was a discussion in there. I just put some links in so I can go back and find them later on. This discourse graph, this guy did a whole workflow, very long post. It was another tour de force. And that certainly deserves some expansion as well. Static website publishing and novel or screenplay development. That's not to say this is an exhaustive list. You can use Tinderbox for many, many different things. But this was designed to kind of inspire somebody who's maybe used Tinderbox a couple times for a couple of small projects, and is enthusiastic about it or energized by it and wants to try and do something else with it. And this is meant to sort of give them some hints or pointers on things that people have been successful using Tinderbox for. The real topic that I'd like to kind of go into a little bit today is I changed. This was originally called "What's in a Name," and then a rose is a rose is a rose. being kind of flippant. And that's the intention is to be lighthearted and be approachable. But Andreas, I think, made a post in the forum on the discussion of the drafts that quoted Wittgenstein at some length. And I did read a little Wittgenstein about 25 years ago, but it has prompted more thought that of in Tinderbox, every note is a node, everything is a node, and every node has attributes. But within the UI, dollar name is the most accessible attribute that exists. It is I think, apart from maybe the outline structure, but I'm trying to think about this, but it is the thing that is you grasp the point of attachment for your cognitive engagement with your Tinderbox file is in the name of notes. I have never regarded dollar name with any particular importance or reverence or whatever. Because I'm a blogger, and to me, it was always just sort of a way to be clever or flippant or kind of a nuisance because I couldn't really think of a good name I just had to put something in there and get on to what I wanted to write about. But the discussion last week about polluting names with prefixes, sort of, and the passion that people feel about that, uh, stimulated some thought on what is the role of name within Tinderbox, and should we advise users to give more weight to considering how they name their notes? Or am I just barking up a wrong tree, analysis paralysis, making a big deal about nothing? What do we have a philosophical consensus as to what the value and role of dollar name is within a Tinderbox document? And over to you, Michael.
Yeah, I've got tons of thoughts on that. First and foremost, I agree with you that name is incredibly important. Name plays a role in context to which you are using it. So, for example, and I'll try to break this up simply. Are you naming prototypes? Are you naming templates? Are you naming what I call functional notes? That's something to consider for names. Are you naming what I've called resource notes, terms, standards, other types of things that you want to be able to distinguish? So, for example, I put a prefix on the word, TRM hyphen space, and then the name of a word to distinguish that. Or are you naming notes that you will be using eventually in your output for like a report? And is that name going to be used for chapter headings, subheadings, section headings, or any number of different ways? And so the context to which the note is being used in my world strictly influences the name methodology extensively. And so, I'm a huge one, as Chuck and others know, to push for be using prefixes and suffixes and camel case, but in the sense that it's used for the functional and resource-based notes. Like you, when I'm writing something, whether or not it be an article, a blog, or a book, or something of that nature, I use name for document structure, title of the note, section of a document, title of a chapter, etc. And when I want to transclude or pull in a note into another note. So, for example, if I'm writing and I say, hey, Tinderbox, take this action code, go grab these 4 terms and stick them in this particular article that I'm writing, having that prefix term, knowing where those notes are in a single place in the document is exceptionally beneficial to me. But here's where it gets interesting when we talk about this idea of polluting name. It's absolutely critical to think, yes, we don't want to, in my output, I don't want term hyphen the name. I just want the name wisdom, for example. I don't need term hyphen wisdom in my output. So I use an attribute I call short title, and I have Tinderbox produce a string sans the prefix or the suffix. so that when I'm using my templates, when I'm using my output, rather than having Tinderbox use the $name in the output, I have Tinderbox use $short title in the output. And so that way I get the best of both worlds. I get the functional use of a prefix or suffix throughout my Tinderbox file, but in my output, I can have the pure string through short title. And that's, again, one of the various benefits I see in leveraging all of the various capabilities of Tinderbox.
Art?
Yeah. Hey, hi. So I would say I completely echo whatever Michael just said. I think also though that Michael takes it to a very high point. So if you're actually directing the Tinderbox, the Hitchhiker's Guide to Tinderbox, mostly to entering users, from that perspective, my experience has been that it has never hurt me to prepend my, as Michael refers to as the functional note names with the letter. It helps greatly insofar as excluding or including in searches, because let's face it, all these functional notes are also actually notes. An agent is a note, a stamp is a note. So is a stamp a note?
A stamp is a
Can
note.
be.
A stamp is a note, right? So, and therefore, you have that scenario where it's easy if you're looking at your Tinderbox project file, you either want to, at least that has been my experience, you either want to see the note as for what it is, like, oh, it's part of a topic or a subject, or it's a functional note. So that helps a great deal for me personally.
Okay. Chuck?
Okay, picking up on what Art was just saying, yes, if it is helpful to the user of the document, the author of the document, to introduce notational schemes that help them find notes, that is a perfectly valid reason for doing it. What I raised a concern about is the implication that can come of when people start saying, okay, that note is a prototype. I got to put a P in front of it. That completely distracts the user from the thing which is important, which is they've got to actually make it prototype for Tinderbox to be able to use it that way. Same thing for templates, stamps, function code. There has to be the first understanding on the part of the user that to get the special attributes or the special capabilities that are associated with notes, such as prototypes or templates or hints or what have you, highlighters, they've got to define it for Tinderbox, the application, to use it as such. And I've seen multiple instances where people are saying, well, that prototype isn't working for me because I didn't put a P in front of it. That's a dangerous concept to present to a new user. Once somebody fully understands the issues, they can invent their own scheme for dealing with this. The other concern I have is the tendency to try and make this into some kind of standard. And I've seen so many instances of that in the computer science world for my entire professional career, where people go overboard and suddenly the whole issue of how you name things becomes a much fought over contentious issue within a corporate environment over whether or not this particular programming group is using the proper naming conventions for what have you, and that leads to a lot of I think huge distractions. If we look at Tinderbox and ask what makes $name different or unique in terms of the attributes within the overall Tinderbox ecosystem, it's because name is an address. And naming and addressing is a problem that we have encountered going back to the era of Babbage and Lady Lovelace. Throughout the whole history of computer science, we've needed to name things, and then we have used those names as a way to get to the object we're trying to get to. That's addressing. In the networking protocol space, if any of you have paid any attention, you've probably come to realize there are lots and lots of types of addresses out there. There's a telephone number, there's a zip code, there's a street address, there are lots of other named entities. There are IP addresses, there are IPv6 addresses, there are MAC addresses. These are all ways to get to something. And often the mechanism for addressing is inconvenient to users. And so we associate aliases. And I think name is $name in Tinderbox needs to first be recognized as a way, not the only way, but a way of addressing that note. $ID is another way of addressing that note, getting to it. $ID has a lot of useful facilities, but it's not particularly user convenient. So having $name be another way to get to that same note is fine. We have relative references in Tinderbox, which are extremely powerful, that allow you to refer to notes, find a note relative to some other note. And all of those things are powerful capabilities. And I think we need to try and avoid directing users to any particular naming convention other than the one that works for them. And we do need to continually remind users that if they want to exploit the power of Tinderbox, they need to actually use the very specific system attributes in a way that supports their intended use. So if you want a note to become a prototype, you got to check on the box to make it a prototype or create the action code that makes it a prototype. If you want to see if a note is a prototype, there's a simple Boolean search you do, is prototype. So those are the things we need to put emphasis on. And I come back to the concern that for new users to tell them that a prefix is a really important thing to do in your name is a distraction that gets them away from focusing on the thing they do need to pay attention to. End of rant.
Again, so Claire, just elucidate for me a bit, and recognizing that this is different in every different application of Tinderbox. But when you say the thing they should be paying attention to, can you kind of crystallize that for me in some way?
Yes, it's that when somebody says a note, creates a note, and they realize, gee, I want to make more notes like this. I should turn this into a prototype, or I want to create more outputs like this. I should turn this into a template. Putting a T in front of it is not going to turn it into a template.
Okay.
Putting a P in front of it is not going to turn it into a prototype. And we have seen instances of people being very confused by that very issue, or thinking that once they click on the prototype, they've got to quickly run around and make that thing have its name start with P. That's totally, it is only useful if it's useful to the author.
Correct. And I don't think there's any debate about that.
Right. And then, the other thing is Michael has done some phenomenal work with the way he's built his tools and systems. And yet we see the need to have code to convert a name that has a functional purpose into a name that you can actually use in an output. So stripping off the term prefix. If you look at an analogy, Mark Barnstein brought this up. People think it was a Unix thing, but it was never really a Unix thing. It was a sort of convention in the early days. But Microsoft totally went overboard on this idea of file extensions. And had to be 3 characters, had to have a period before it. And if you put extra periods in your file name, it was going to cause you all kinds of problems. And we still see this all over the place, .pdf. But in most systems, even now including Microsoft's Windows, the .pdf is arbitrary or unnecessary.
Right.
It's a PDF or it's a text file because the file system meta characteristics indicate it so.
It's a vestigial organ at this point.
Right. So we have this whole mindset about the way to name files When in reality, we should be telling people, name the files in the manner that makes the most sense to you. Forget all the stupid computer sciencey, nerdy requirements that keep getting thrown out there.
Okay.
If it
Can
winds up, yeah, go ahead.
go ahead. Well, I want to pause you right there though. But there is some, and I put a post on this today. I probably didn't see it yet. There is this kind of wisdom-based learning. What makes most sense to you now may not make most sense to you 6 months from now, 2 years from now.
Yeah,
There is an evolutionary sense of thinking. There is also this desire of people like myself who have slogged through some of this for years, who have said, if you think about this now, you'll save yourself an enormous amount of pain in the future, even though you may not understand the need of considering this issue now. Um, and yeah, I guess I'll leave it at that. In that there is some learning that we can impart that and I can't tell you how many times Mark Anderson told me in the early days of my Tinderbox use. And Mark would never say any of these words, but basically his intent was shut the fuck up and listen to me. Do it this way because it's going to make your life so much easier a year from now.
yeah. Well,
Right. And it took me a year to then realize he was right. So
well.
like,
So
how do
so
you balance that?
let's go back and understand. I think Mark was saying this in a recent post he put up. The reason that he went into a naming convention for the things in ATBRF was because he wasn't in Tinderbox when the user was reading it. In other words, it's ATBRF is a web page or it's a document. Most people are not using the underlying Tinderbox. So as
Right.
a result, when he's describing something, he didn't have any other way of telling people that this thing he's named was a prototype. So it was a convention for documentation purposes to put a P in front of it or an A in front of something with just a note. It was documentation oriented, and it makes a complete amount of sense in that context because there's no other particular way for him other than constantly saying over and over again, this is a prototype, this is a prototype, this is a prototype. If he just puts a P in front of it and says, in my documentation, if I put a P in front of something, it's because I'm just trying to signal to you that it's a prototype. So that makes sense in that context. My concern is not so much what people do once they get going and once they really understand what they're talking about. My concern is with what do we tell people at the beginning? What do we want to emphasize to people who are getting started? And the thing we need to emphasize is use the attributes. Use the things that Tinderbox has provided that are very powerful. Learn to use them sooner rather than later, because as soon as you learn to use them, you will be able to make so much further progress down the road. And don't worry about the naming of things, because that's easily changed and manipulated.
Ooh, well,
Um,
don't go there. It's
well,
not so easily changed. I mean, but David Eddie's had his hand up for a while. Go ahead, Dave. I think
Wow, I barely know where to start. Uh, so a bit of history coming around again, and I posted in the log the conflict between my dollar name and Mark Bernstein's dollar name. Because mine was I wasn't the author, but I stumbled 1988, just before the IBM mainframe world collapsed. I stumbled into a little two-man firm that had a product called Dollar Name that automated the enforcement of good, consistent names. Long story, and the firm he had bid on, the owner is a two-person firm, had bid on an Army IBM territory, an Army requirement to automate naming conventions. The names they were going to deal with were upwards of 255 characters long. I have the specification, if you wish. I've scanned it, and 255 characters long. And they obviously concluded, and this is prior to 1988, that the only way this problem could be addressed was with artificial intelligence. Dollar Name was written in mainframe assembler and a working product. So therefore, it was obviously not worth considering. The rumor had it is that the Army spent $15 million and never got a working prototype. And this was in 1988. So here we are, someone do the math for me, 12 and 25, 37 years later, here we are. Identifying the problem you're trying to solve. I'm shifting gears here. Identifying the language of the problem you're trying to solve is separate from the language you have to use Tinderbox or any other tool. Reserved words. You have to use the reserved words inside the tool. They are separate from the language of the problem you're trying to solve. And most people, I think, as I read here, that come to Tinderbox with this, they got an itch they want to solve, but they've never sat down and formally formalize the language of the problem.
And
The
I think Mark
So-
has made a comment in the chat to that extent, to that point where he says the big enemy is not ip string thing. It's the amorphous note name, things like task note or to do, where you grasp the most immediately accessible idea that may capture what it is you hope to do and put no other thought into it and write that into your document. And there it lives in perpetuity because, Chuck, it is not easy to go back and change names because the document
Okay.
grows around this structure. Now, I guess maybe with search and replace, you could.
No, you never, any serious programmer,
Yeah,
never
but
ever.
let me pause. Let me pause there too, just to interject one thing before I forget. Easy is in the eye of the beholder. So perhaps for me or Chuck, it is super easy. You just run some action code and it automatically does it for you. As long as you've done it right, because if you don't do it right, you could screw up a lot of things if you automatically do it prematurely. The other thing to keep in mind, though, in name structure, there are certain reserved characters that are important to stay away from, like backslash. Because to Chuck's point, the name is an address, and Tinderbox uses path, HTML structures. So if you have a backslash in your name, you invariably could end up breaking things. So there's other kind of technical things, and using backslashes colloquially in our conversational naming is quite common. So there are some functional things that one must learn along the way to shy away from doing. So that's another kind of side note to consider.
Okay, this has been a productive discussion, and I think it is largely within the bounds of perhaps context signifier for the user. What I'm also curious about, and what I think I'll do, maintaining the enthusiasm, is review these forum posts where people have created these elaborate documents and kind of look at their naming structure and see if they've done something that it's somewhat of an epiphany to me that dollar name enjoys pride of place within a Tinderbox document. It is the first thing that the user writes. It's the first thing the user sees when he looks at a document. What thought process should go into, how much should we think about dollar name? How do we write meaningful names? And Roger, go ahead, take it from there.
Just some observations. I agree that dollar name is and dollar text are the two most significant attributes in Tinderbox. Without them, Tinderbox would not be that useful. But I also contend that when somebody new comes to Tinderbox and they look at the examples, they start typing names and creating an outline and putting text over there to describe what they just created in the outline. They're unaware of dollar text and dollar name, and they don't have to be. That's what makes it accessible to the novice. Dollar name and dollar text are things that come later when you need to do things beyond the default capabilities of Tinderbox. In other words, this is stuff. Go ahead.
That comes from, but that bumps into people's experience. For instance, first apprehended Tinderbox as an outliner. And
Mhm.
the outliners I was familiar with were like More and Think Tank, and some other obscure Macintosh applications where there was no separate field for text, that you had a level within the hierarchy that your note occupied. There was no separate title for it. It was just the text. So that's, I think, and as a result of that, I always kind of regarded dollar name as just sort of um, it had some utility in terms of the structural infrastructure portion of it, the role thing. It had more utility for me in that role than
But
as a name itself. But you're absolutely correct, Roger. You can use Tinderbox as an outliner only using dollar name and never entering anything in dollar text.
again, I argue that you don't even know, not even aware that you're using dollar name. Dollar name is the thing, is the
Yep.
nomenclature that we
Right.
use that describes where the text you typed in for the outline name. That's where it lives within the infrastructure of Tinderbox. That's invisible to you. You don't have to care about that until you start to get into action code, to
Well,
doing
that's where,
things.
and I think that's the audience we're trying to reach here. That you've gone beyond the immediate basics of Tinderbox, and you had some success or some enthusiasm, and you want to take more advantage of it. And so you need to begin to understand what these things attributes are and what their roles are.
Well,
But I'm wondering if I've been missing a bet on being more productive in Tinderbox, or apprehending the role or the capacity of the app by not appreciating the existence of dollar name, um, as opposed to just a text box with a hierarchical position within an outline. And I think the guidance I was going to put in there was, use meaningful names. And I'm not sure how to tell people how to do that. And so, other than in structure, I mean,
well,
that's where the most obvious role is. But I think in thinking about Tinderbox and Tinderbox as a tool for thought, that the first thing we write is a name. It should be meaningful. I mean, I
Oh no,
think.
no, I agree. You're absolutely right. Also, part of the problem is, at least last 55 years of software development, tell somebody how to write a meaningful name. It's always context dependent. That context includes the brain of the person who's going on. So
Right,
there isn't
right.
just a set of guidelines you can write. But
But
you
the
don't
tool
have to be.
shapes the.
My primary argument, first argument, is that you don't have to know any of this stuff in order to use Tinderbox productivity. You create outlines, and you can create maps, and you don't have to know anything about attributes or anything else. And also, by the way, just to be clear, for my purpose understanding, is this document intended to be something you hand or do the new developer, the new Tinderbox user, that's when they first sit down with it? Or is it like, if you've got some experience with Tinderbox, here, go read this? Because if it's the former, the document's missing a description of what attributes are. You start using the word attribute, and there's no indication of what an attribute is. It presupposes that the reader already understands that. And
Well, and that's a
yeah,
good point. So we need to
yeah.
have some discussion about attributes, that they exist and what they're for. That
Well, and I love
fundamental
Mark
level.
Anderson's. I love Mark Anderson's quote. If you love it, put a. It's like Beyonce. If you love it, put a ring on it. If you love it, put an attribute on it.
Right.
Right?
Well,
Yeah, but you still have to understand what attributes are and the role of attributes play within the Tinderbox infrastructure.
so
The Tinderbox infrastructure allows you to do stuff that you can't do without, you can be productive with Tinderbox, as I said, but you can get it to do a lot more for you if you step behind the screen, if you will, and delve into the infrastructure and the world of actions and attributes and so on.
so
Go ahead.
well, I mean, again, attributes as infrastructure is easier to grasp, I think.
Yeah,
But
for some people, and not for others. Yeah,
you're
it
so
depends on who the general audience of Tinderbox is. Ideally, it would be everybody who has a computer, but that's not going to be the case for varying reasons. I used to be a professor, and I taught a lot of students uh, at George Mason University in their software engineering program. and you had students, and this was a master's level and PhD level program. You had students coming in who had, who wanted to get a master's in software engineering, who had never written a line of code, and a lot of them just picked it right up and went off. Others, their brains weren't wired that way,
Yeah.
and you know,
Well, let me flip this around to the document we're looking right here. This document reflects my own prejudice with regard to the relative merits of dollar name versus dollar text.
no, but fair enough. I think I'm
But-
not
but-
arguing that, but I'm not arguing that there's not merit.
No, so I'm asking the question here, how should so in use meaningful names, okay, that I think is a relatively meaningful title, more so certainly than respect the root, where I was being clever or witty or, lighthearted.
Well,
So
let's talk about that. I mean, use meaningful names for a second. What guidance
sure.
would you tell them for that? Then just let me ramble for a minute here. Um, there are different dimensions or planes, if you will, within this stuff. Somebody talked about the problem domain. Now, I think it was David Eddy. Yeah, one of the first things you do when you set out to write a system for software, ideally, is to define the problem space, to define the vocabulary, or identify the entities and the relationships among those things. This is long before we ever get to programming. And these are the things that play roles in the problem space that you're trying to work with. So, there would be names for that kind of stuff. And then there's kind of names for stuff that you have because you have infrastructure. All right, you are dealing with some kind of a query language if you're using a database of some kind, and stuff like that. So you might have names to reflect that, or roles for things like functions. All right, function notes. Michael Becker brought that up. Function notes, and well, think about it. Back a second. So, like, you have a stamp. Stamp is part of the infrastructure of Tinderbox. In the old days, all you could do is you could go up, you create a stamp, go up to the menu, and execute the stamp. Somewhere along the way, in the past few years or so, we ended up with stamp notes, where instead of which allowed us to write action code easily in a note, rather than having it go through the dialog box and so on and so forth. And that also becomes part of the infrastructure now, behind the scenes, if you will. You don't have to have it; it's entirely optional. But then, if you do decide to use it, things come into play that you have to worry about, like renaming. You pointed out, and I agree with you, that renaming is a pain in the butt. It's been a pain in the butt for programmers and developers, and it only improved sometime in the last 20 years when we got decent refactoring tools. And we could say, "Oh, I want to change this thing from bookstore to bookmart," and everything just magically updated. Actually, that would be a great kind of a thing to have, a refactoring tool for Tinderbox. Anyway.
So that was my experience with my blog, is that I had basically one big flat file that exported, and it was becoming enormous in terms of my organization of my website. I just had one long list of files from 2013 down to 2022, I guess, or 21, when I decided to refactor and created, year archives and everything, and brought some order to what was becoming just a big mess of a list of files. But this is where
can I pause you right there? Well, can I pause you right there real quick? I think that
Sure.
you hit a real key point, though. Where does someone start with name? To Chuck's point, I would argue, if you're opening up a Tinderbox file, don't worry about it, right? If you're like, I've got an idea, I got to get this, purge this
Right.
stuff out of myself, jump into a
Brainstorm.
Tinderbox and just start writing, brainstorming, throw it all together, because that's the beauty of this tool, is you can throw crap out there and then incrementally mold that crap into genius over
It
time,
works.
and it allows you to refine your thinking.
But
That works until you have to change things, though. You have to change naming. So, I mean, it's not impossible. It's just friggin' hard work.
And begin with the end in mind. That if this is just like, I got to plan my kid's birthday party, no big deal. You can do whatever you want.
Understand what birthday party for kids means. In
Right.
your mind. You understand that.
It's a limited in scope, rather simple in complexity. But if you're attempting to tackle something like a Zettelkasten or
Or a doctoral dissertation,
the discourse graphs, things of that nature, that you should be able to do some rapid fire, sort of rapid prototyping, rapid brainstorming type thing. But be cautious when you try to transition that to your, I guess production type environment. And I think we've lost Mark. Is he still available anywhere?
I mean, he's there.
Okay, good. I don't see him on my thing. But Chuck, go ahead.
Okay, so if um, if we come back to what is a meaningful name, I think it's important to first of all point out to people that Tinderbox is different from the other outliners or brainstorming tools that people have worked with in the past. And the name is meant to be a handle, and maybe that's a better term to use. It is a handle to get to the note. And if we could get that concept across to people at the beginning, if they're just starting out, I think that would be helpful to them, because they can now say, oh, yeah, and then point out the text is as much as you want. You can put all your text into the name, but you've in a sense made your life a little bit more difficult if you're going to be using the Tinderbox tool. And if we get people to see that one distinction between dollar name and dollar text, I think we would help them on their starting journey to use Tinderbox. And then as they go along, they can begin to appreciate, oh, the name as a handle allows me to get to from one place in my document to another place in my document. They can begin to start relating conceptually the concept of the names in their outline to the outline hierarchy and the outline order. And that implies containers that are named. And you can have a handle for a container which might not have any text but has a bunch of notes in it. So it's that conceptual framework that I think we want to get across to people who are getting started out, so they can see the constraints of Tinderbox, but also the power that it gives them once they understand what they're working with.
Go ahead, Roger.
Um, Going back to the comment Chuck made earlier about the use of the prefixes and so on, and I get what he's saying, but here's a challenge. Just stepping back from my solution for the moment, and that is notes have roles. Some notes correspond to entities in my problem space, if you will. Other things exist because it's in the it's the backstage, if you will. It's infrastructure stuff like templates and even prototypes. And I'll talk about that in a second. Uh, it's hard to if you have no prefixes or no other naming convention and you just got a bunch of names. It's hard to if you have particularly have a large set of names. It's hard to tell which ones are playing which role. Sometimes you'll have names that play both roles. Like, for example, I create a note for a book, then I'd later decide, oh, that needs to be a prototype for whatever reason. So I create and mark it as a prototype. Well, now it's a book, okay, but it's also a prototype for other things that are somehow book-like. But just by staring at the name book, I can't tell what that role is. I have to do other things to see what it is, and so on. And programmers have had these problems as well, and we do naming conventions to help us separate these things, stuff from the problem space, if you will, the natural vocabulary, from the stuff that's been invented to make so we can make what we're trying to do work. So there is some value in being able to have distinctions among things. Something I do instead of putting just P book, I use this display expression and essentially say if it's a prototype, display it with P colon then the natural name book. All right, those, and that P colon, first part when I first started working in Tinderbox, P something always kind of made me pause and say what the heck that is. When I found that by putting some kind of an indicator like P colon and then the name, the P colon kind of faded to the background, and when I needed to know if it was a prototype or not, it was there, but it didn't interfere. And since it was a display expression, it wasn't actually part of the name. That I find that to be useful when I need for distinctions. So this takes away to some degree the argument about having to worry about naming things and changing names of things because the roles have changed. Does that make sense?
Yes. I'm looking, I'm gonna put somebody on the spot maybe. We don't have a woman in the audience? Or is there?
Unfortunately, not. We need
Okay.
to do better at that.
I wish we had Beck Tench here right now, and I
Yeah.
thought we had Stephanie earlier. I am rogering for all of the namespace issues with regard to training, customizing, training Tinderbox, programming Tinderbox. I'd like to move a little past that and see if I've missed something in the value of dollar name as
Yeah,
aid to thinking.
I think you have. And let me try to put it this way. We've talked about this before over the years. For me, and again, to Chuck's point, this is really personal because it becomes very personal, right? But for me, the way I've been able to think about it is, and as we talked about it ad nauseum in this call today, context matters. And a note is a note is a note, but a note performs very purposeful uses in Tinderbox. Um, in that the notes for me can play for and really, if you think about it, and Mr. Bernstein made a comment about this at some point in the past. Really, notes are nothing more than he had a better reference for this, but notes are nothing more than a collection of attributes.
Mm-hmm.
And that collection of attributes can be either system generated attributes that are actually used to help Tinderbox perform its function, like make this note red, or user generated attributes that are storing user generated strings or to drive user generated functions. Having said that, for me, there are four ways that I look at. There's four broad containers for me that notes can fall into. Thinking notes, and this is like my chum bucket, my inbox. Um, Writing notes, notes that are actually going to be part of my output. Resource notes, which is a whole collection of my research, terms and regulations and standards and products, however I want to organize those. And I use prefix and suffixes judiciously in that environment. And functional notes, notes that are used for Tinderbox to function, templates, prototypes, stamps, libraries, and all of the other types of notes found in the hints folder. And so for me, when I think about notes and I think about it in the context of name context, it's really useful to be breaking that down. So in the thinking notes, I don't care what name is. I'm just trying to get it out of my head. And the writing notes, I really do care about what the name is because I'm crafting them because it's going to be a chapter name, a section name, a blog name. It's going to be part of the output.
So
At which point I may be using resource notes. I judiciously use prefixes and suffixes because I want to be very specific. To Chuck's point, I only want one term that defines the concept of wisdom. I don't want multiple notes that have that. It's term hyphen wisdom, and I'm defining that word so I could be reusing it across all of my projects. And then you've got the functional notes. And then the last thing I'll say, Dave, is you talked about evolutions of projects. For me, when I start thinking about that, Tinderbox is this giant space where I can have all of these things happening at once in one space. So, for example, in some of my Tinderbox files, I have 3 or 4 books that I'm writing simultaneously in this one document because I want those 4 books cross-referencing to its resource files. When the project gets big enough, I'll be able to copy and paste it into another document. So there's a lot of things that can be going on in one Tinderbox file too, which I think is important to think. But go ahead, you were gonna comment.
Well, I wonder if when you look at what do you normally work in outline view?
I predominantly work in outline view, yeah.
Me too. So
and then I use the other views for analysis in thinking purposes,
right,
to be able to see my notes from a different lens.
But when you look at outline view, what you are seeing is a list of dollar names. And that to me seems to me in my experience that I may have been not misusing, but not taking the most advantage of that
Okay.
aspect of Tinderbox that I can have. So I go to the atomic notes,
Okay.
which I was never a big never got excited about. But now I'm beginning to make a connection here between atomic notes and dollar name. And
Correct.
I'd
Correct.
love for Mark Bernstein to jump in at some point. But
Before I
go ahead.
forget though, let me remember though, when you're looking at dollar name, let's not, I think we want to be, dollar name's incredibly important. You're correct. But especially when you're in outline view, you also have flags, you also have color, you also
Color,
have background color. There's so many other, so,
signifiers.
as important as that dollar name is as an attribute, honestly, all of the other attributes that help create visual affordances beyond just the name to help me think and distinguish can become as important to your process or your work as any other attribute.
Well, it depends on the context, right? Those
Right.
affordances, like flags or something. If you're looking for all of the different things of a different kind, having a flag of a particular visual appearance helps you identify those quickly, independent of the name of the particular note, regardless of the value of dollar note. Now, so in other words, it lets you filter visually, and then if you care, you can look at the individual note names and go from there.
And Chuck, I'll get to you in just a second, but I'm thinking now of when in the link roadmap view that you get lists of names, lists of dollar names. Am I correct? I'm not another feature I don't exploit very much, but again, where I have used it in the past, I get a list of names, and from the name, I can't tell exactly what the note's about. So I have to click through and view it.
Okay.
It's not like
All
inspiring.
right.
It's not triggering a thought. It's making me do work to find out what did I mean when I wrote that.
Well, that's
But
always going to be the
on that note,
case.
you can use display expression as Alexander's already pointed out. You can also use hover text.
Oh,
And if you
well,
create a
yes,
hover text attribute, you can give yourself a trigger to be able to deal with later.
yeah. The point here is you're never going to be able to create names that are specific enough for you to understand what it's referring to. If you do that, you end up with something that's roughly or even equivalent to the value of dollar text. Okay, so the names are there to provide context for you, mental context to be able to help you get someplace.
Somebody tell me, somebody who's an advocate of atomic notes. Is there somebody in the audience who's a believer in atomic notes? Okay, but I mean a real, because I think, Chuck, go ahead. You've had your hand up for a while.
Okay, so again, I'm trying to keep focusing on we're talking about practices that will help people begin to use Tinderbox effectively. And yes, dollar sign name is very important. But
In the
we've gone
context of
down
accent code, it is.
well, in many respects, it's important. It's most important though, as a way for you to know what note you're talking about. You have
But that
written
occurs when I'm dealing with action code. When I'm sitting here working
no,
on the outline, I don't
no.
really
When I'm
know
in the outline, it's the handle that gets me to the text that I wrote.
Yeah, but I don't even have to think that way because as long as I understand that I can open the text or close it, if I have it open and understand that whatever note I click on in the outline, its corresponding text appears on the right, I don't have to think about the handle stuff. Yes, I agree. You are correct. That is a handle mechanism that gets you to the text. So it's not guaranteed to be a unique handle
But
because we could overload
okay, so
names.
that gets me into the very thing I was going to get into, which is
Yeah.
many people in this community have been DevonThink users as well.
Me too.
And one of the things that I've seen DevonThink users go absolutely berserk over when they first encounter is, oh my God, I've got two things in my DevonThink folder, DevonThink group, that have the same name. Oh my God, how did that happen? They're two
Well,
different things.
sometimes there are papers that have the same name. I'm sure you've encountered this in your
Yeah,
career,
no,
right?
exactly. The
And
point
so the
is
point is the name is not sufficient to uniquely identify. In Tinderbox,
correct.
this is handled by the dollar ID thing.
Correct.
There's something similar in DevonThink as well.
Right.
That
Can I
Go
call
ahead.
time here? Can I call time? I
Yeah.
want to get to a more philosophical question, and this is to Mark Bernstein. Conceptually, within Tinderbox, is the role of dollar name exclusive? is it related more explicitly, intentionally toward structural and programmatic access to notes, or is it a peer of dollar text? Is dollar name up? So if I gather a bunch of notes through an agent or I look at a bunch of links, should I be able to review a bunch of dollar names and make some inference from what that collection of names suggests to me? Should there be meaning within dollar name that invokes insight, or does all that work occur in dollar text?
Well, this gets into some really, really interesting and, as we've seen today, difficult philosophical questions. Uh, my usual move here would be to point out that in story space, title and text, name and text, existed for about a decade before there was any action language. And so, ontologically, the name and text equivalents came first. I think that it's more important, if only because there are a mass of people, some but not all beginners, who mostly use Tinderbox as a way to collect named texts where the names are summaries or tokens that represent the text they're attached to. They're literally titles. That's maybe using Tinderbox like using Excel as a table generator, but that's the great contribution of Excel has been making tables accessible to everybody. Uh, I just, for fun, wrote down some things about names in Tinderbox that I thought, and I put those in the chat. And I found that a very interesting exercise. I tried to stay out of the prefix issue, but there are interesting things.
Want me to stop
That
sharing and put your screen up?
no, it's in the
It's in the
chat.
chat.
Oh, okay.
It's in the chat.
In particular, I was thinking, okay, suppose we give in to the often proposed uh, constraint that we prohibit either slash in names, or we just prohibit all the dangerous punctuation from names, and we just ban them. You can't give things names like 2 plus 2. And we could like legislate all or almost all of the difficult cases out of existence. And we actually wouldn't miss the band names that badly. I don't think it's necessary, but we could get rid of that.
Well, you could
But there
also,
is nothing to be done about the fact that short names are better than long names. Omit needless words. And if you're going to sometimes use an acronym or an abbreviation, you either want to use it everywhere you use names, or you want to use it consistently, because otherwise you'll never be able to search for the thing without forcing yourself to remember it might be an abbreviation.
Mhm.
And that way lies madness.
And as genius as you think you are in the moment, you will forget either minutes or weeks or days or months later. So
yeah.
giving
Art?
yourself signposts are helpful.
Yeah. Art?
Yeah, just 2 points. One is just to append to what Eastgate was saying about the names. I remember at one point I'd even used a colon sign, and that's also not a good idea. In general, just
Mhm.
avoid any special characters when you're naming, because it will mess up your searches and you'll require regex just to kind of escape them. And I will add one more point, which is probably to throw a little bit more oil into this, which is that the whole idea of the prepending the P or whatever letter to indicate the function of a functional name. I had started doing it long before I needed to, but I'm glad that I did because as I started to become more expedient with Tinderbox and using functions and the like, it's now become a way of doing things. Because heaven forbid you start one way of doing things in Tinderbox and then a year or two later you go back to that old project. Now you got to remember the old way in which you were doing things.
Chuck?
Yeah, I want to pick up on what Mark was saying, and yes, we could um, exclude all the dangerous characters in names. Of course, in today's world, we have the opportunity to take those dangerous 7-bit ASCII characters that are causing problems and replace them with
Yep.
graphical equivalents and do that automatically for people to get them out of trouble. So, for example, something that I've recommended and use in my own practice is if I want a quote in a name, I always put it in as smart quotes. I force it if it's not done already, and it's there are equivalents to a forward slash and a backslash that can be used out of the Unicode sequence that would give the same visual affordance, but not run into the conflict with the actual ASCII character that is a slash.
So,
So
so
there's
on that
things
note,
like
Chuck,
that.
just to interrupt, use the concept of like HTML entities is what you're referring to, or something different.
What do you mean by HTML entities? There's
Well,
there's
there's
so many
ASCII,
names that conflict with
yeah,
that.
but there's ASCII codes that you can put in like 5, 6 digit
Oh
codes
yeah,
that
you
represent
don't
characters.
want to present real users with that kind of garbage. I mean,
Got it.
I spent so much time editing %20 out of text that I brought in. It just is mind-bogglingly stupid.
All right.
Um, so again, I think we need to think that this is something for users that is convenient, and it is possible to overcome some of the character conflicts we have with names, and it's a semantic confusion. Let's ask, why does this happen? Because we have a human being that is interpreting the character one way, and we have a machine which is interpreting the character in a very literal fashion, in a totally different context, part of the addressing scheme of a note. So these are things that it'd be really nice if real users didn't have to worry about. Um, but then coming back to, again, what I think we're getting at here is I love Mark's list of recommendations or guidance on naming. I think that's the kind of practical guidance we should be providing to people. It focuses on using names that are relevant to you and what you're trying to do. At the same time, I think we should be educating users about some of the ways that you can distinguish one note from another. So let's talk about something very obvious, prototypes. We have the prototype attribute. That's one way of doing things. We also have the ability to put the prototype note in the prototype container, which is kind of built into Tinderbox. If we don't want to see that container in our map view, we can turn it into a separator container. Turn the actual prototype container into a separator, at which point it still has the same ability to be searched and processed through the outline view, but it doesn't mess up the map view. Things like that, I think, would be the kinds of hints and guidance and practices we should be bringing to light for new users.
So,
We
so
should be, go ahead.
I was going to say, so essentially, you're separating the essential from the accidental. The accidental being prototypes, all right? You
Yeah.
could click something, yes. So that's really, I don't care in terms of the problem space I'm working in.
Right. I mean, we need to focus on helping people solve their problem, not Tinderbox's problems.
Okay.
And where Tinderbox is relevant is when Tinderbox provides tools or affordances that help them solve their problem, not Tinderbox's problem.
I, yeah, I agree. And,
So,
and I'm looking forward to kind of watching this video again and capturing more of this as I listen to it. But I don't want to abandon what, let me say, let me see if I understand this correctly, Mark Bernstein, that dollar name, despite being the most immediately accessible element of the UI to the user, is perhaps not as significant in terms of the tools for thought, in terms of manipulating thought, in terms of kind of capturing our thoughts and making them visible on the screen or the page as dollar text. That dollar text enjoys a privileged position within the conceptual view of Tinderbox, as that is where the rubber meets the road, and that dollar name is merely a handle. So if I if I
I confess I think of it as leaning that way. But what makes me so hesitant here is that there are, in fact, Tinderbox projects, including some I use, that have little or no text in the notes, and where almost everything is in the names. Uh, I think that's a kind of a peculiar way to use Tinderbox. Of course, that's the predominant approach amongst other outliners. And so
so
it
what
certainly is a viable approach,
well
but I think the text is privileged.
okay, that's good. That's an important thing to capture in this. But where I find that somewhat is on the things like the roadmap, which presents a list of dollar names, and agents that gather lists of dollar names. That is the first thing that the application will present to the user, and that must, I think, for the user to get the most advantage out of Tinderbox, they have to give some thought into what the content is of dollar name. Certainly you don't
Well,
want to write an essay in dollar name, but I go back to the thought of atomic notes, which I don't know very well. I read about it occasionally and dismiss it because for whatever reason it doesn't appeal to me. But the idea that you capture an idea, you distill it down into one line. And I think that that's something that fits within the context of dollar name, but I could be wrong. What I so I'm reluctant to abandon that idea for that reason. But I would welcome other perspectives on how people view naming their notes. I mean, I think the predominant audience here is programmers, and that we view dollar name as a way of manipulating, getting to the data that we want in the note, which is even the other attributes, not just dollar text.
Yeah,
Um,
can we have our poet respond to that? I don't know if
yeah,
he's a
is
Look,
programmer.
that Art?
I already had my hand up. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So I was just going to, and in fact, I wanted to expand on this and I just let it go because when I was talking about just how Michael has the four types of notes, for me, and actually, the naming is a mnemonic typically. Like, if I'm going to look for notes, I'm going to look for notes in two or three different ways. The first is I'm going to do a search for a note that may contain something. Now, there I have an added advantage because I can search even by attribute or by prototype, or even attribute. So it's easier to narrow down the object of my search. But most typically, when I'm scanning through my document, I just want the name to reflect uh, uh, the content that's within the note, and B, where it lies in the panoply of ideas or rubbish that I've thrown onto the project, just to get a general sense of where I'm going in this project. So either I have, like, for example, like a flat file where it's just one container or the root map, and I have a bunch of notes. Before I even start placing them, the name will sort of indicate to me where on my scheme of the project that ultimately that note will fit in the incremental formalization process. But otherwise, largely, it's because that note sort of is a recap of whatever is contained inside of it. Now, I don't go to the great extent of going, well, okay, this name is a summary of the contents, and that I won't use a prefix or anything for that because to me it takes away from the immediacy of being face to face with your ideas. And being able to scan a bunch of ideas. The way I look at it is like, so for example, when you're going back and looking at your project, it's almost like you're in a submarine and you're looking through the periscope, because you can only really see one little thing at a time to focus on it. And I want my periscope view to be such that as soon as I look at it, it immediately reminds me why that note is there in the first place. So I will do whatever it takes. Sometimes I will use color. Like all I'm trying to say is that there's not necessarily a formal way to do it for me, because I actually do need the variety.
Roger?
And no two projects are the same.
Sorry, Art, didn't mean to cut you off. Art, Roger?
Yeah, Dave, help me out here. I'm trying to understand why there is a need to mention dollar name and dollar text in this context.
Sure. We should go to the forum post. It was the Wittgenstein comment that in my container here said you use meaningful names, and it made me ask, what is the question of a meaningful name? What is the role of a meaningful name? What is the role of name within Tinderbox as a tool for thought? And the prejudice that I brought to the application and have had for over 20 years now is that dollar name was a secondary citizen, that it was more of an impediment to what I wanted to get to in Tinderbox than an asset. And it occurred to me that perhaps I've been doing it wrong all this time, and that my time would have been better spent thinking about good names and in terms of going back over 20 years of blog posts and things of that nature, and being able to rapidly identify ideas that I had explored again and again and again, without doing things like tagging and all of that stuff.
All right, all right. I think maybe I'm starting to understand here, but so the discussion about names is vital, and even making the relationship with names and the text, that's vital as well. What I'm really tripping over is the use of having to refer to the name as dollar name, and the text as dollar text, because those particular labels, those particular words, don't mean anything outside of the realm of backstage in Tinderbox where I'm writing action code, and I need to be able to reference the value of the name of the note or the value of its text, but using dollar name and
It
dollar
has
text.
no particular significance other than I picked it up from Mark Anderson, is that as we talk about attributes, then you precede them with the word dollar. You're making explicit that you're talking about the attribute. And within this context of designing, trying to write a document in Tinderbox, for instance, I just thought now, instead of capturing these thoughts as imperfectly as I have within the dollar text, within the text, if it makes it more comfortable, I might have been writing individual notes where I try to capture the small, attributes discussion, role of attributes, name as a handle, and then capture them as individual notes using dollar name. I mean, both ways are functional. I could slide this thing over and give myself a lot more room to write long names. And then I wouldn't have to go through and explode or anything like that. I'd have individual notes, and perhaps each of those notes would then be more meaningful when I go back to review.
Yeah, I agree. But if you look at that outline over here, there's no place where the term dollar name appears.
Correct. I mean, this is just in the context of our conversation here.
Okay, so you're using dollar name to refer to whatever the value of the name is.
Correct.
In this conversation. Okay.
Yeah. I'm sorry if that's been a distraction.
Oh, that probably is my fault on my end.
Yeah. No, I'd like to hear from, we tend to be a self-selected audience of people who like to noodle around in Tinderbox and make it jump through hoops and do things. And I'm going to go back and watch some Beck Tench videos and see what her practices were. There are some other people that have made good use of Tinderbox that think outside the way I think, and I might be able to mine those for some insights into naming. But I thought it was a worthwhile discussion to do it today. We've certainly used up most of the time on that.
No, fair enough. We all bring different baggage with us, and my baggage is 52 years of programming,
Yeah.
and that doesn't always serve well.
Yeah. Well, I'll turn it back over to
Well,
Mike.
actually, let me leave it on that one point because I think that thanks, Dave, for turning it over. Good timing. I think there's a really important lesson to learn here too, in that as you do naming, as you build your methodologies, as you figure your own processes out, you start developing methods and boundaries and things that work for you, and then at some point you need to realize when those things stop working for you, you've got to have the ability to let them go and start seeing those boundaries and things that work for you now as barriers, drop them and move on. And a great example of that was when I was first learning Markdown. I went down a path and I built all these Markdown templates and I did all of this. And then at one point I just realized, well, wait a minute, Markdown's kind of the same thing as HTML, and everything I've been doing for the last few months has been way overcomplicated. And I refactored everything and made it so much simpler.
Yeah,
And for a
this is
while
an
I was sitting
example
there.
of the use of
Just
abstraction to overcome complexity.
right. And so for a while I was sitting there kicking myself thinking, why did I waste months making this too complicated? When in reality, I just realized that I just needed to let that go and accept the simpler thing now. So your boundaries that you set to make things work for you become barriers at some point as you evolve.
Well, every
And
time,
learning to drop those barriers when ready and set new boundaries is, I think, a really good lesson. Roger, go ahead.
every time you drop down a lower level to a lower level of abstraction. So, for example, you drop down from notes and maps, and you drop down to action code, you're at a lower level of abstraction, and the thoughts that you can think in action code that abstraction presents are narrower.
Well, and a great example of that is something Mark Bernstein taught me about 7 months ago, was recursive programming. So I had a set of action code that was about 500 or so lines long, and it was broken up into like 5 or 6 major chunks. And then when he taught me recursive programming, where I could condense the code down so that it would recursively work against itself within context, I was able to get that 500 lines code down to like 90. And it just, but yet in so doing, it created a level of abstraction that I needed to be able to maintain to really understand what was happening.
Yeah, but until you learned about recursive programming, unless you just managed to figure that technique out yourself, you were stuck with what you had there.
Right. And so I think that's part of the final lesson here. Yeah.
Well, I have one other comment here. Subject matter. Here's Tinderbox. It does these things, and you can do all this other wonderful stuff. You can solve your problem using Tinderbox. Another question is, and I may have missed this along the way, is how do you use Tinderbox to solve your problem? What's the thinking process that you go through to identify names, to identify prototypes, and so on? And this is pretty high level stuff, but it's still, here's how Tinderbox helps you solve your problem.
Well, that goes back to Nikas's comment in the forum earlier this week of I think he said I'm a playwright or I'm an artist or something. How do I use Tinderbox? And maybe that's the theme we can use for next week. If we can get them on our meetup next week, that'd be great. Because that's the big challenge ultimately how do we use this tool and the ecosystem of tools around it to help our lives be better?
Yeah. I mean, you hand me a hammer, right? I eventually figure out that I can whack things with it, but I also don't understand going forward what not to whack with it, like my thumb.
Yeah, it's funny. My son actually used that analogy last week. He's like, Dad, I don't understand. We seem to start to look at AI as the universal hammer and turn everything into a nail. And that's really confusing me. And I think it's breaking the world.
There's some wisdom there.
There really is. Yeah. Chuck?
I was just going to quote Oliver Wendell Holmes. to your earlier comment, Michael, for the simplicity of this side of complexity, I wouldn't give you a fig. But for the simplicity on the other side of complexity, for that, I would give you anything I have. And I think that is the philosophical approach I take to Tinderbox. Tinderbox is the way I can navigate from the simple-minded through the complexity to the simple, the elaboration of a truly simple idea.
Well, and I
And
think that thing you're pointing out, Chuck, is simple and simplicity are two different things.
yeah, and right.
And it's context dependent too.
Right. But I think that most of us are probably dealing with complex problems. And if there's an end goal, it is to get to something that is a simpler system to work with, or a simpler viewpoint, or an extrapolation that provides powerful insights. That's what we're trying to do. And in that regard, I think that's one of the principles we should be perhaps trying to share with new people coming to Tinderbox is some of the philosophical stuff. I also will just point out that I've continually found that many of the observations Mark made in the Tinderbox way have been really helpful to me in getting started and thinking about the tool in a proper framework. Just a lot of stuff in there that is example oriented, but very helpful.
Yeah. Another quote there is from attributed to Einstein is everything should be made as simple as possible, but not simpler.
Yeah.
The trick is knowing when to stop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Art?
physicists clearly don't know that answer because they're continually looking for the rule to rule them all.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
That rule
Art?
might be don't do anything, don't touch anything.
Yeah, so I just would add only one sort of like a recap if you're looking for something, Dave, to for your purposes, is that let's think about it very simply. Like everything in Tinderbox, every element in Tinderbox, atomic element, is a note. The note is there for a purpose. It's up to you to determine what the purpose of that note is. Either it's a functional note or a resource note, whatever kind of note is. And you develop your own dialogue with the program with respect to how you want to come back to that note, if ever.
No.
Once you establish that dialogue, it's important for you to maintain some consistency, because you might change your mind a year or 2 years down the road, but the program will not know that you did it.
Right. I have no debate with that. What my concern was today is that I'm bringing my own prejudices to writing this document, and that I may have been laboring under misapprehension for over 20 years as to the role of dollar name. And I may be perpetuating, expanding, spreading that misapprehension by writing a document that doesn't give proper weight or proper value to dollar name. And that's what the purpose of this discussion was.
Well, I don't know
But
that you
I think,
necessarily have that, though. I think there's
yeah,
value in what you're doing. And let's face it, it's our background and perspectives and biases and prejudices that make all this rich, and they're worthwhile hearing. And you learn something, you make adjustments. I think you're fine on that.
No, I think
Bringing
yeah,
it to the
I
group,
don't think you can.
I'm missing a big piece. I think I'm missing a perspective. I think again we're kind of a self-selected group, and I think I welcome another perspective. Not to disparage anybody who participates here. Certainly, all our time is valuable, and I'm grateful. But I think there are people who are making productive uses of Tinderbox that we aren't seeing reflected in this discussion. I could be wrong.
No,
I
absolutely.
mean,
We totally have our own echo chamber here happening here. But also,
well, if I
Dave, what I really
can,
like, what I love about what you did today was a key strategic moderation tool that you used today is you kept coming back to asking us, all right, great, but why? All right, great, but why? All right, great, but why? And I think we need to keep doing that, right? Because we're not there yet. It's somewhat of a Socratic method, right? We've not gotten yet to the answer. And we need to keep asking that question, why?
Yeah, ask why at least 5 times.
And do
Yeah.
I understand what you're saying? I need to restate what you guys are saying, but and I didn't do a good job. There was a guy named Bernie DeCoven who was had a website about fun. He's a friend of Dave Wine, brilliant man, now deceased. But he kind of invented a practice called technography, where he would facilitate meetings using an outliner and capture all the different perspectives in an outline. And it was a tremendous tool to see to have people feel heard by seeing their words on the screen in the outline. And I did not do that today. I didn't really enter it with the intention to do that. It occurred to me as I was beginning to write in there that I should have. But outliners and applications like Tinderbox are tremendous for collaborative work in person or virtually here. It's not exactly a document that you can share editing, in real time, but certainly in this, it's good to have people's thoughts and opinions appear and know that they've been acknowledged.
Well, Dave, I thought you did an exceptional job, not just this week, but last week too. Last two meetups have been fantastic, and as given your tutelage, so thank you.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, shall we call it? I'm getting ready for the 49ers game today.
Go Jags.
All right.
Enjoy the game.
Or Buffalo.
Yeah. See ya. Take care. Bye-bye.